As a student, I loved creating wood floor materials in Substance Designer, and most of the times I came to YouTube to make these materials. I scouted for the best tutorial to make them, and they were all quite simple. So today I wanted to give you something that you can use that I didn't have when I was a student. I want to give you how I would do it now that I'm a professional after 5 years of working in the industry for AAA games. We're gonna look really deep into this material, the one you're seeing right now on screen. Now for this material, we're gonna take a look into patterns, edge details, surface detail, and even the base color. You're gonna see everything from the wood grains to the moss generator. And all of this is going to be procedural, and you can copy to use it yourself wherever you want, or even to learn. And in fact, I'm gonna give you the files on my Patreon for free. So take a look at it and tell me what you think. So as you can see, this is the material I created. We are here in Substance Designer, guys, and this is quite a moldy material. Yeah, and it has a lot of details, as you can see as well. Now, the reason I made it this way is because I planned to use it in an exterior environment, and also because I wanted to show you something procedural that you can do with these kind of materials. Now, the reason the tiling is actually quite big is because I wanted to really show you also the details on this. And for this first part, we're going to start with the tiling, something many people struggle, but not that much at the beginning with this material. Why? Because actually this pattern is super easy to make. By using a tile generator, we can change the pattern to a square, lower the scale, set the X amount to 1, and then change the amount of tiles we want on Y. Now, if you're wondering how we make this, we just go to the offset and set the offset to 0.5, and then set the offset random a little bit more. Now, I know you're confused about this black space you are here, but don't worry. You can always come here and play a little bit with the intersize. If we go with the intersize to let's do minus 0.1. That should call us closer. And we can even go lower till we get somehow like this, let's say. We want to kind of like match the space between this and this one. So another thing you can do is you can start increasing the amount in X to basically get a little bit extra shape, as you can see here. If we do this, we start to get a different pattern and we can start playing with it. This is basically the same thing you are going to do with brick walls. Now, the only difference is that today we're going to learn more than just one pattern. We're going to see 2 more patterns that are really easy to make and at the same time really complex to take away. This is the first pattern we're going to work into, and it's basically different wood planks in different squares pointing to different directions. Of course, this is not an end product. This is something for you to actually see how you can start this pattern, and then you can go on with the rest of the tutorial to see how you can apply it to your materials. In order to do this, we need a tile generator and a checker node. Yes, these are the only things you're going to need. Now, for the tile generator, you want to set the amount to 1 and the Y amount to 20. You want to use a square, or you can use, if you want, a brick pattern. Yes, to have more of these shapes coming around, but again, I do not recommend this. Just go for a brick. And we're not going to touch anything around the offset or anything like that, because we don't need it here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of the checker and multiply this on one side. This is going to give us these squares that we see here. Then we're going to replicate the same effect, but in this case, we're going to use a safe transform to safely rotate the texture and change the direction of our tiles and multiply it by the invert of the checker 1 to get this image. Then we're going to blend them together with a max lighten, and you have your pattern. The next wood pattern I wanted to make for you was actually this one, but as you can see, I failed. I didn't reach to make it in time. So yeah, sometimes you don't get to do everything. Even if you are a professional, you can fail, and that's all right. Now, I'm gonna keep working on this to give you exactly how to make this pattern. I'm missing just one part, and this is not gonna go this way, but I managed a way to make something similar. Now, the other pattern that is actually quite similar is this one, and it's super easy to make compared to this one. It's actually kind of hard to get it at the first time. So you're gonna get a whip generator, yes, which has really weird images, as you can see, and you're gonna set the tiling to 2x2 and lower your shape to 0.02. Now, the whip generator is gonna look something like this at the beginning, so don't worry, you already see kind of like the pattern you're drawing, but if you start to make things, as I just told you, you're gonna start to see how these things start to kind of like pop up. Now, the secret to this is also kind of getting rid of this area here. Why? Because we want these straight lines. We don't care if we have a small bevel around here. We want the straight lines, and for that, we need to go here and add a 0 after the comma to the gap that this has. Now, why are we doing the rest if this should be enough? Well, if we go to the next node where there is a threshold, and the threshold is the best node for mask, you're gonna see that this actually doing the job, but there's a small issue. Now these things, they're really not working well for us, and if we want to change this, it's gonna break. So we're gonna use an edge detect to get exactly the shape that we want with the space we need. And we can just make them smaller, yeah? Maybe not that small, because you can see it gets an artifact, so maybe just keep it around, let's just say 1.1, yeah. And then you can play a little with the edge roughness if needed. Yeah. Now in this case, I don't think you're gonna need the edge roughness. But if you want to actually transform this pattern, then you can use the safe transform and change the tiling of your pattern or the direction as well. Now this is actually fully procedural. You can see that I can change and play a lot with this, but I would advise of trying to make this even maybe too much, mainly because it might start to break at one point, but for the moment it's still working, but I don't think you're gonna use a tiling bigger than this one. Now for this particular material, after doing the tiling, what I do is I always blur it and then use the levels to correct information. Yeah, one of the things I'm trying to achieve here, you can see a really slow blur of 0.3, is get a small bevel here and then push it as far as I can. Now you're not gonna be able to see this here, and the main reason for that is because we are doing a lot of edge damage later. So something I'm gonna do in this spaghetti mess that you see here is I'm gonna remove the color because I want you to see the actual height of this material. Yeah. So right here, what's going on after this is we are starting to play around with the edges of our material, and we do that by using slow blurs. So when it comes to the second step, we are talking about edge deformation and edge details. Yeah, as you can see, the edge deformation in here is actually quite small, and there's a specific reason for that. What I see a lot is that when you try to work with edges, you directly go to a slow blur, not knowing what the node does. Yeah, and you instantly follow all tutorials that they do this. They do a clouds 2, connect this here, get the samples up, and lower the intensity, and this is your edge damage. Now I used to do this a lot as a student, and I realized that it's just useless, especially if you're trying to achieve a realistic result. Why? This is too strong. If I were to replace this by this, you're gonna see that my shape is gonna deform completely. See? And now this doesn't make any sense. We need to build something that makes sense to the eye of our viewer. Now, in order to do this, we need to be subtle with our details. And this is where intensity and mask come in. So the first low blur is having a purling noise. And this purling noise is basically designed to deform the shape. Now you can see I'm using a really low value of 0.02. And I'm also using the min mode. Every time I'm working my edges, I will use the min mode. Why? Because it helps me push my edges inwards. And that's what you want to do. You want to play with your edges inwards. You don't want to go outside of the initial shape you have in here, because then when you try to mask this for a flat fill, it's going to be a pain to you to do it. So we're going to go inwards. And if I increase intensity, you're going to see that this is working great in big areas and small areas as well. That's actually the magic of the purling noise. Now, when I want to make some distraction, I would use a clouds 2, but in this case, you are seeing that I didn't directly use it. I made some masking. So first, I got the clouds 2 with a low value, a 0.08 value in the intensity, and it's just the basic clouds 2. There's no change to it. And it created a lot of details. Now, these details were applied again with a bevel and a copy using a Gaussian spots. This, believe it or not, helps a lot to what I'm doing, because again, it helps me control the intensity of these details. See? So right now, by using the intensity of this low intensity in my slow blur, what I'm achieving is a control effect that now, despite it is controllable and it makes sense, it's way too much. So as it is so much, what I do is I use a blend node and a Gaussian blur to make a mask, so it controls it more. What is a different kind of mask that you could use? Well, for example, you can actually get a purling noise. Yeah, let me just random see it. You can lower the scale of the purling noise, so this is kind of like a big mask. And then you want to be a smaller mask. That is where the Gaussian spots one comes in. So you're gonna get a blend, get this here, get a multiply, and once you have this, you're gonna do something like this, and then you replace it. And this is gonna generate way more intensity in these details, yeah, but maintaining a little bit more shape in some areas, while in others it's gonna be a little bit smaller. As you can see, this works really fine. But again, in my case, I really like this result. Now feel free to play with any of these nodes or anything you wanna do in here. Yeah, there's a lot you can do actually to get this result. And as you can see, I've been repeating it quite a lot. Now in this clouds 2, this was actually quite normal node. Then for the second clouds 2, we scale this down. We're going for smaller details. And again, really low intensity, 0.02. yeah, again, Gaussian spots with a blend node in copy. I didn't want to deform too much these wood planks, but something I would have added normally, yes, is an extra step to this. So instead of using only the purple noise in a small scale, I would also use it in a big scale. This will allow me to actually deform in big size, yes, my wood planks like this, for example. Now, depending what you're aiming to build, yes, this can be useful or not. In this case, for me, it seemed a little bit kind of overkill, if you have to ask me. Now, again, I'm just gonna go back to 0.05 just to be a little bit safe. And I'm gonna leave it as like a detail. I'm not gonna make much of us about it. Now, to end this, what I usually do is I use the levels to pull all the details back to its place. This helps me get a more defined shape. So if I were to leave this here, for example, you'll see that the details are going to become a little bit more stronger or closer to each other, and that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, I want something a little bit more kind of different with my own style, and the level helped me do that by correcting the information and bringing it a little bit inwards to form some space where this kind of grass that you have seen there is gonna be applied. Now in here we finally get to the flat fill. Yeah, and let me be clear about this. Why are we getting a flat fill now and not getting a flat fill before? And why does the flat fill look like this? Well, there's actually a lot of questions, but let me answer this. If we were to do this before, what had happened is that the shape wouldn't be the same. See how this is kind of like a straight line, but if I change this flat fill to this one, now the shape changed. If I created a mask based on this shape, yes, it wouldn't match my procedural later. Yeah, and I can't add any kind of gradient before all of the edge creation, and that is because if not, the slow blur will capture it. So if I were to make, for example, here a shape node, yeah, and in this shape node, I would get a parabole and then try to do a slow blur, like this one, for example, you're gonna see something as increased intensity. You start to get even details in these areas, and we want to avoid that. We want to use the slow blur to actually help us shape our wood plank. If we do this, it's just gonna create noise that we don't want in our shape. So to avoid that, we do first the details and then we go for a flat fill. Why is this not working? Yes, why is the flat fill giving us this information? If I have to be 100% clear, I have no clue why. This always happens with the flat fill. Unfortunately, it kind of like gives us wrong information, and I think because the shape is basically going from one side to the other one. I'm being 100% transparent about this. If you know why this happened, please let me know in the comments so everyone else can know. So what we're gonna do here with this flat fill is we're gonna get this into a flat fill to gradient. I know it feels a little bit unuseful, but listen to this. We're gonna use this as a blur input for a non-uniform blur, as you can see here. The idea for this is to soften some edges around here. And the reason we're softening these edges is because then we want to sculpt this by using a crystal ones that has the width lower to -2 and invert it to then be divided in this area. This is the change that we are generating. We are creating some kind of sculpt around the edges that is looking really nice, but it's only looking really nice because we're also adding other stuff. So if I were to remove these levels, for example, you can see a little bit more of the damage that it has created. Yeah. Now, once again, there's actually quite a lot of space between the wood plank. I don't like it, so the levels is helping me correct that plus the shape of my wood plank. Now this step here was developed by one of our community members, and if you want to be part of a free community that helps game artists to create textures and substance designer, you're gonna find the link in the description of the video. And remember, it's free, we help everyone. Now going back to this, yeah, there's a little bit extra work that we're gonna have to do to sculpt the edges as I wanted to. And that extra work is gonna be what you see here. I'm getting the levels result into a bevel. Yes, and I'm using a negative value of 0.01. Then I'm inverting this and using a warp to create some deformations 2 times, yeah? One with a Perlin noise and one with the Gaussian noise. Now after that, the only thing I need to do is basically subtract this to my wood planks, and that is what's given me this kind of like really nice edge around these areas, kind of like if I were sculpting this in ZBrush. Now you can go farther in this, but I do not recommend it. It starts to be way too strong for my like, so I do recommend maybe using a really low value, in this case 0.35 for the subtract. Now once again, we're gonna use the levels to correct a little bit of this information by pulling the whites a little bit more in. If I weren't to do this, what I would have is a little bit more of bevel in my wood planks, see, that are basically the same everywhere, but I don't want to have that. I want to have specific details, so the level is allowing me to do that while remaining some of the details that I made before. Now once that is done, I created the final detail, and it's these kind of really small circles that you have here that is done by a dirt 1 that has been blurred with 0.2 intensity, and with a low blur with a 0.001 value, we generate this kind of small distraction or erosion in the edges of our material. Again, this is a really small detail, but if you pull all of these details that we just mentioned, yes, all of these together with a really low value, you realize that you get a really nice product, and that's what you want to get. You're gonna get really nice results, and sometimes it's not just getting one thing and getting super strong, like using one slow blur with a huge strength or a warp with a huge strength. It's about using several tools several times, yes, with different combinations and lower values. Yeah, and I would really like you to start trying out in your materials. Try to go softer with the intensity of the nodes. Yeah, try to make a little more variations. Try to look more into your reference and see what's happening, and try to split that from the rest. Now we have come to the part that most of people already know how to make, that is creating the wood surface noise. But for this case, I actually made something different. Now for the surface detail, I know what you think. I'm just gonna show you this. Yeah, the basic generator for wood patterns that, if you use it right, might not give you the result that you need, and it's all gonna depend on how you use it. Now this wood generator has been online for quite a lot of time, even since like at least 5 years ago when I started learning. However, I was always unpleased by the result of this. Now I find two things. We can use this for something else than just this, and also if we change this node, the purling noise, by a Gaussian noise, we have the chance to create a more smooth wood pattern. Yeah, so if we go back here, you see how this changed. Now if I were to go again to put the purling noise as it was, yeah, look at the difference between this and this. Yeah, there's a lot of areas that don't make sense. But on the other hand, the Gaussian noise delivers a way better results, and if we tile this back, see, we have even better results that if we use alongside the directional blur, we can get even better ones. Yeah, what I'm trying to show you here is that there's always a way of exploring. I used to do this where I found something on a tutorial and I just stick to it. Yes, I always stick to the purling noise with all of these, and I always had a hard time making like wood materials with this. Yeah, because again, the tutorial I was watching worked for one specific type of material, but it was not working for the rest. However, now that I have more experience as a material artist, I'm capable of doing more things by exploring a little bit what I want to do. And this pattern is not only useful for wood, but for many other things like metal Damascus. Now, different to what you were thinking, no, we're not going to start with that kind of pattern. We're actually going to start with something different. We're going to get a directional noise one and a Gaussian noise, and we're going to use a mean value, yes, to have some areas with a little bit less detail. Now, we can't really see what's going on under the wood planks, and that's because of the moss generator. So let me find it first, because it's been a while since I opened this one, and let me lower this a lot. And I think I went the other direction, my friends, because this is old moss now, and that should fix it. So as you can see, yes, this is not the traditional wood pattern that you would use. Yes, this is kind of like a mixture. And the noise you are looking right now, yes, the one that I was using here, it's not that strong. It's barely there. And the reason for this is because I wanted to get another style. I didn't want to get that noisy pattern of wood that you always get in all the tutorials. I wanted to get something a little bit more different. Yes, and today I'm going to show you that different. Now, the next step that we are going to take on is basically breaking this wood pattern into different parts, and not by just using the traditional wood pattern. We're going to get a directional scratch node, and we're going to set the scale to 4. Then we're going to lower the pattern amount to 0.01, so we don't get that much intensity on this, and then get the pattern size to 0.5 and 28.82. Yes, remember, this is going to change a lot of the result that you have seen, yeah, but so far it hasn't affected that much. Now, where are we doing this? Wood planks is a combination of different elements, yeah, that when you pull them together, they create a really nice pattern. But not all wood planks have the same details. Not all wood planks have the same old wood pattern that I just showed you. Some wood planks, some have something different, and we're going to do different today. So in here, we're gonna get these directional scratches and warp it with a purling noise, as you can see. Really low warp, 0.07. Then we're gonna blur them and use a slow blur to generate these kind of stretch lines. Here's the good part. If we do this again with a clouds 2, yes, with a really low value, we're gonna start to deform this a little bit, just a little bit, not that much. Yes, it's just adding some artifacts that you can visually see in the image. Then, with another directional warp to break the tiling, we're gonna generate some sculpting. Yeah, sculpting you're not capable of seeing right now because of the amount of things I put in, but if I pull this down, you're gonna start to see those kind of sculpts I was talking about. Yeah, now we are going to leave this here because it's not really making that much intensity with a value of 0.15, but there's other things that are going to come later that are similar to this that are going to be the key to making this work, and that's basically the directional scratches. Yeah, we want really nice scratches in this one. We want lines that are going to cut throughout our wood, and we're going to do it in different size, intensities, and variations. Now the first one is going to be a scale of 3, a pattern amount of 0.07, and then a pattern size of 0.2 and 60. As you can see, these are really long lines. We're warping them a little bit to give it a little bit more of intensity. Now if we remove this, I think they would even look better. So I would tell you to actually give it a try yourself and see what you can find. Now the next steps are going to be pretty much the same for the surface detail, but we're going to do some changes in masking and intensity. For example, in the next node, we change the pattern amount to 0.005. Yes, we did the whole process that we did before, as you can see, adding only a slope blur to get a little bit of broken areas in these lines, and then use this into a safe transform to tile it, yeah, and then subtract it with a mask. And this generating some really nice details in your materials. Now, something super important to take in consideration is the intensity of these details. Yeah, some details want to be or need to be stronger, some don't. Now, I have this rule that smaller details need to be stronger than bigger ones. So, for example, in here I had it at, let me see, 0.08. That was a mistake from my part for me, because you can see it's barely visible. So what I want to do now is turn it to 0.2, where it's going to have at least a little bit more visibility, yes, to the material itself. And look at that. These lines are making the difference compared to before. These are really the heroes. But there's something else before in here, yeah, that we're gonna look maybe in the end. Now the next steps are a little bit of a copy paste, but not because I didn't want to work more, but because I want to maintain quality and the story. So I'm gonna be going and lowering the scale of these details and increasing the intensity to which I subtract. Before it was 0.08, in here we're doing 0.04, yeah? So in this case, just because of the small change I just did, that doesn't count basically. But with the next steps, we're gonna go again, a scale of 1, an intensity of 0.13. Now the idea for these details is to start to be more visible the bigger they get. Yeah, as you can see here, 0.24, that these are the strongest lines that we have in here. Now this may look a little bit like too much, but there's something else kind of like touching this that we can't really see. Now one of the things I want to do first is I want to remove maybe these lines, because right now I'm feeling that I have too many lines into this. So I'm going to remove this, and it's not really changing, because the problem here to making this look better is actually this pattern here. So you might recognize this. This is the pattern that we just saw some minutes ago, and we are using just lines. Some wood patterns have only these lines. They don't have the general like warping or so on. So what I did is from here, I include a slope blur to get some noise and details. Then I did some directional warping to add some variation. Then I transformed this to tile it and then applied a blur. So this was actually kind of working at some point. Then it actually kind of broke down and stopped working really nice. But we're gonna remove it today. We're gonna come here, remove it here, and it should remove some parts of that area on the top that are really messing around. But as you can see, this is still not in the best place, and that's also because of this part here, this sculpt I tried adding here. So I'm gonna remove this maybe a little bit more to make the surface a little more kind of like plain like, yeah, and that's gonna give me a result even closer to the wood floor I was looking to make. Yeah, as you can see, this is working actually quite nice. And if I go into a cylinder shape and take a look at this, this looks more like a wood floor. Now, once we have the surface details done, we need to move to the next step. And that's kind of like the distraction part of the material, or let's better call it the moss. Now the moss is going to be a little bit complicated right now. Why? Because when we're creating moss, sometimes it's really hard to identify if we're doing it right or not, because we have no color. So sometimes it's better to add this at the end. So if I were to lower this, for example, you're going to see that the moss here is being generated. Now this moss only looks good because of how I blended with the color. If you weren't being able to actually blend it with the color really nice, then this wouldn't work that well. So I would tell you something. I'm going to show you how to make this moss, but do add this at the end when you have the rest of the things done correctly. So the moss is generated by just these 4 nodes. We are using a moisture noise that is being high pass grayscale to remove the contrast and the background of the image, as you can see here. And it's being blended with the black and white spots too. by using a copy. The only thing we're doing here is basically adding two kind of noises that are kind of like similar and complementing them, and then using the levels to again add contrast to this. Now by using a clouds 2 and a threshold, we're able to create a mask. The reason this mask is not working as you would expect is because actually I have to change the mode from greater to lower and start kind of like this. Yeah, and it will work as you would expect. Now you can get a non-uniform blur grayscale, yes, as you can see here, with a value of 1.66 and all samples and blades and maximum to kind of generate this soft edge that you can see in the most. Yeah, that is helping us not get a really sharp edge. If I were to remove this here, look at this. This is super sharp and we don't want that. We want those edges to be soft, and edges are always really important, guys. Now the next mods are gonna be kind of a mess because I haven't organized the graph really well, but if you have seen some of my shorts, I think you already know how to do this. We're gonna make some moss stains, and these moss stains are really fun to make, especially like this. You're gonna create a grunge map 04. Yes, this grunge map 04 has these kind of shapes that are pretty similar to the moss stains or to one of my latest materials, this kind of like a medieval roof tile. You're gonna lower the brush patterns, you can see here, because we want to get rid of the edge that's gonna be tiled. So usually this grunge map, yes, 004, will look something like this. We try to take this into a tile generator as I'm doing here and blending it with the rest of the images. It'll just show the sharp line. Instead, we increase the brush pattern, remove the edge, duplicate this node and changing the random seed while maintaining the same brush pattern, and then blend all of them together into a tile generator. Yeah, so we get an image like this with a lot of different shapes. Now this part is not as easy as just dropping things in here and just throwing random parameters. Something really important about the tile generator in this case is first the tiling. This tiling should also be really nice, and depending on the tiling you want to have a scale. You also want to leave some spaces here kind of like wide open, so you give the material a little bit of space to breathe. Now another thing is that if you go down to the end of the tile generator, you're gonna find this, the blending mode. Usually it will be in max. If the blending mode here is at max, at add, it's just gonna add the information over the other one, and we don't want that. We want it to get the maximum value of this image so all the shapes can basically combine together. Once we have this, you want to move to the next step, the histogram scan. This way we can actually choose how many shapes you want and the intensity of them. Now of course the ones that are whiter are gonna be the last one standing always, so you can change that by changing the parameter in the grunges. Now for the next step, we're gonna get the edges of these shapes. For that we're gonna use a non-uniform blur in our histogram scan with really low value, 0.05. It's just a small blur around the edges, and then another blur node with this at a value of 1. We're going to combine both of them as a subtract, which will give us this shape. Now check this, I'm not using my full value like this, and using a little bit less. Yes, why? Because I still want a little bit of information from these moss stains. Moss stains are not only just kind of like water stains or coffee stains. No, it's actual moss that has been pushed with water and now it's in one place and then it starts to grow in a different way. So it has a little bit of thickness to it, and it's also nice to see it in our materials. So what we're gonna do with this is we're gonna get a histogram scan to get these really nice edges, and we're gonna combine them together with a max lighten, get a really nice edge on these shapes. Once we have that, we're using a directional warp to basically move them around. Now what we are using here is the actual height of the material. Yes, we're just breaking this down so we don't have repetition in some areas, and we get to cut this as you see here. Now before we actually add this to the material, we need to kind of like clean the surface, because we're not going to do high blend. We're going to actually use a copy mode with a value of 0.02. And to avoid taking details from the actual wood plank, as you can see here, what we're going to do is we're going to get a non-uniform blur connected to the wood planks and get this directional warp into the blur map. This is going to allow us to actually generate blurs based in the intensity or the thickness of the moss, allowing us to get a little bit more closer to realism. After you have done that, add a small sharpen, because you're not going to be able to add it later. I'm using an intensity of 0.5 and it's actually quite helpful to make some details a little bit more sharp and visible in my actual height. Now the next step is generating something like this, which is actually kind of weird. If you see, like, what is this? Well, this is moss, but this is not any moss. This is the moss that goes in between the wood planks. Why? Because this is an exterior material, and as an exterior material there are some of these small things, yeah, that you can see here falling down that we are using, and sometimes they pile up a lot in between the wood planks. So we're gonna use those ones basically. So let's see how they work. So guys, there's an issue with the camera that got really hot, so I can't record myself, and this is the only chance I have to record this thing during this week. So for this moss, we are actually gonna do it piece by piece and by hand. We're gonna get a shape node and set it to a parabol and lower the scale to 0.87. Then get the size to 0.03, and from there we're gonna warp it a little bit to make some variation. This is gonna be the tree, or let's say the core of our shape, as you can see here. And then we're gonna start to add different branches, and blend them together. Now, how are we going to add these branches? We're gonna get the same shape and get it into a directional warp with a specific direction and a Gaussian node. This is gonna allow us to basically get all the things we need, and with a transform node that is being set to no tiling. Yes, remember that to set this to non-tiling, we need to go transformation. Go here, absolute, no tiling. Yes, and then we can do it without tiling. And this way we're going to be able to put this into a place, and we're going to use a max lighten mode. Yes, we're going to try to build a most believable, let's say, moss grass that you can. Now, as you move forward, you're going to add more branches, as you can see. I made at least 3 more branches, and then you're going to do this. You're going to blur this with an HQ blur, value of 1.35, and use the levels to pull everything in, and this is gonna give you the best shape for your moss hair. And the best thing is that this is completely procedural. If I were to change the random shape, this is gonna change, but I have to also change the position of some of these ones. Still, look at this. It looks really nice and realistic, and it still works quite a lot. Now we're gonna go back to the other one, and we're gonna move with the next part, that is basically adding a small gradient with a multiply so that we can blend them together. Now, this is actually quite straightforward. We're gonna get a tile generator, set the tiling to 200 to 200, set position and scale to be random. The actual scale should be 7.63 and the scale random 0.22. We want this to look like a small piece of grass. Yes, we don't want them to feel like too big, so we need a little bit of space in between. So take advantage of that with this particular part. Then set your position to random and your rotation to random as well. Once you have that, set the color random as well to 0.71 to add some height variation between them, so there's feels that there's something in the background and not just on the foreground. Once you have this, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to your last node where you had your wood planks, and you're gonna get a threshold to get this area here. From here, you're gonna get a blur, increase the intensity, then use the levels to increase the size of this part, a warp to deform this, and a Gaussian node to create a little bit of height variation. We are using a subtract with a value 0.61, and the Gaussian is actually a Gaussian spot. Then we're gonna multiply this by the grass that we found before, and we're gonna use a high blend to blend them all together. As you can see, this is working quite well. And of course, yes, you can see a little bit of this going on below, but when we add the color, that's not even going to be visible. So don't worry about it. Now for the high blend, you want to get your contrast to 1 and your high offset to 0.72. However, for the next part, you're going to do something different. You're going to get that grass, and you're going to get it into a tile sampler, and again, a tiling of 200 by 200, but different to the last time. That is basically exactly the same, so you can basically duplicate this here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go down to the bottom and start increasing the mask random until we get a really small amount. These are the grasses that we see on top of our floor, and of course we want them to be small and not that much of them because we're gonna add more things later. For the height scale, I'm using a value 0.5 because again, this is actually quite high, so we don't need much over there. Now this here is an atlas I got from Quixel Mecha Scans, and you can basically add them by inputting all of these into an atlas scatter and changing your parameters and then using the masks. But the tutorial is not about this, so we are not gonna really go into these details because now we're gonna go to the base color, the final step. Now as you can see, base color is actually quite a mess and it's not as easy as you think, but the process of making it is actually kind of a little bit more weird than you think. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna pull this in here, as it was before, and I'm gonna try to find the beginning of this because it's actually kind of a little mess. I didn't get time to organize this. I'm sorry for this, but when you get the file to download, I promise you this is going to be organized. So for starters, what should I do? So what I always do is I get my normal information, as you can see here, but in this case I only got the normal information from my wood planks. So I couldn't really live with myself, so I made a little bit adjustment before actually explaining this, but again I will really fix this better later. So what I usually like doing, yes, I got all the information from this normal node that is connected directly to my wood planks, yes, before adding any kind of moss, and I'm getting my curvature smooth and curvature node, and I'm combining them in a blend node, into a copy node. So this is actually quite useful to generating color with a lot of details that follow the shape of our material. So I get first the curvature on one side and then the combined curvature here. Now to start, what I did is I blended the combined curvature of the wood with this flat fill to random grayscale into a multiply. Yes, now I have different wood planks with different tones. And then I got different gradient maps and got color from my reference. As you can see here, I got these two different values and then use these levels to add a little bit of detail on top, like kind of like if it was kind of like breaking. Yeah, kind of like a warn generator that we can use later. Now, if I plug this in here, you're gonna see how this is looking, and it looks nice. It looks like a really nice Starfall stylus material, but we are about details. So the next thing I did is I got the combined curvature again, here as you can see, and then add color, and again add this to the material. But in this case, I use a different mask. I use a Crunch Map 014 with a directional noise combined into a blend with a max lighten, and then I use a multi-directional warp. This gave me a lot of really nice details that again I use as a mask, allowing me to go from this to this, which has more sharp and variation in my color. Now this is where it starts to get tricky, because as you can see, this starts to kind of like differ a lot, and there's quite a lot of things to see here. So the first thing is this color map. Yes, and then you have another one that are basically kind of like the same but are being applied in a different way, and the different way is just a mask. So I'm using the wood pattern I created before. Yes, the only thing is that I'm using a non-uniform directional warp to generate a little bit more variation, and I generated this color. Yeah, so I'm gonna pull this up so you can actually see it, and then kind of like do this. It's basically the same, put it around here. Yeah, and now that I have this, yes, with this gradient map over here, I'm gonna combine both of them with a blend. And of course, both of them have an add sub, but the difference again is the mask. The mask is different. In here, I'm using a gradient map that has been changed to grayscale after getting some color, as you can see. Yeah, and I'm using this color as a mask as well here. Yeah, this is kind of weird to do. I'm not sure why I did it. It's kind of like, hey, I have this idea, let's try it out. And I try it and it worked, and wow, it makes some good results, at least for the moment, because then when I combined both of them together, it gave me a result like this one, where I have some areas like this that are actually quite live and saturated. Now that I have a kind of like really nice color, this wood feels actually quite too live. So I had to make it a little bit more dead. And in order to do that, I got this information into an HSL and lowered the saturation of the material, and then combine it into a blend node, and I have my already kind of like dying wood plank. But how am I controlling this? Well, I'm using actually two nodes, the same nodes. The metal edge wear 2 times. One has a difference where the tiling is bigger and the other one is smaller. I combine them together using a max lighten. This node shouldn't be here, this one as well. And then using a sharpen, yes, I get more nice information and use this as a mask. So now I can choose how much I want this to actually wear and have destroyed information compared to what it was before. Now, once I have this, I had to start working on the moss. The moss was kind of like the hardest part to get because I had to do it in different parts. And one of the main parts I did was actually the moss that you all seen. It's kind of a moss that doesn't have maybe texture, but it's kind of like green. It's everywhere. And it's this moss generated by a dirt generator. Yeah, these nodes use AO and curvature to get a little bit of the information that goes in between and generate a really nice mask. And once we have this, we start moving to the other parts of this area. Yeah, the parts that we care, the parts where we make more moss using the same color but a different mask. In the next one, you're gonna see that I started to add the moss that we were using for the edges, as you can see here. Yeah, this is kind of the same moss. The only thing is that right now the mask is a little bit smaller than it should, kind of like more bigger like this, where I have more spots. And as I moved forward, I started adding things like, for example, these scratches. I used a scratch generator and the previous base color to basically add a little bit of life to the material, where if you were to scratch this, well, you would see the wood that is actually healthy because it hasn't been rotten or eroded by the environment yet. Now for this part, we're gonna go to the other part that is the stains, the moss stains. And I love making the moss stains because just by doing the right work before, we're capable of doing a better work here. Why? Because this mask can allow us to actually see what's going behind the color that we generated, that is this one. Now, for my taste, this has actually way too much color variation, to be honest. I don't know if maybe using this would have been better, but the problem with using this is that now everything looks at the same color. And this is one of the main issues I see when people are kind of like working with their materials and creating color. They use the same colors everywhere. Try to do a little more variation. If you haven't gone way too dark in your color, try to go lighter. It's going to create contrast and make things more interesting, not only in color, but in roughness. Once we have this, we can start adding more kind of detail, like for example, the grass. The grass that we had before now has been added and has its own color. And we're going to keep doing this until we get to the last of them all, that is basically the scanned information that you see here. Now, another step I like taking in here to make the material look even better is using my curvature information into a gradient map, and getting this into an overlay. Stan Brown showed me this in one of his materials, and it's amazing. It works really great. It does some great highlights, and it allows you to actually keep the information for your base color here. And again, it works fantastic, giving amazing results for your material. Now, some final details before you finish this. I use a sharpen to make the information, of course, more kind of detailed in the base color, as you can see. Yes, this is really important to do. And then I HSL to make this a little bit more desaturated because I made the color way too much strong to what I wanted to see in Marmoset when I rendered this. Now, how do we generate a really fast roughness that is actually believable? Well, we get our last base color node and we get this into a grayscale. Then we use a histogram range to control the intensity of this roughness and the variation, and we add some of the details that we know that are gonna start to affect the roughness. In this case, I wanted the wood to be a little bit more kind of like shiny because the wood would be a little bit more reflected, because before it was actually varnished, so it had some really nice color. And as you can see, it's actually reflecting there how these color parts are actually reflecting more light than the rest. And then with time, you get dirt, moss, and moss stains on top that are basically the opposite to it, generating a really nice color that will give you a result like this one. Now, this is how I made this wood floor material, but if you want to move this to make amazing renders like the ones you are seeing now on screen, you have to take this a step forward and learn how to use Marmoset. Now, I have a full tutorial in Marmoset to render your materials in here in my YouTube channel, and you can take a look and start practicing now and show me the results in my Discord community. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in our next chapter.